Let's talk now to Rupert Darwall, author of Green Tyranny, on another subject that has come across the desk this morning, because we talk all the time about net zero. I've actually got a piece of the Telegraph online at the moment going on about it, and why Keir Starmer needs to ditch the net zero plan that he's got if he wants to win the next election. But the latest ridiculous story that we've got here is that the National Grid was forced to fire up 2 coal power stations after solar panels failed to work. Why? Because of the heat, apparently. Rupert, this is mad, isn't it? I mean, surely, people have said to me, we've got solar panels in the Middle East, we've got solar panels in places like Turkey. They don't seem to fail because it's too hot. Why do they fail in this country? Good morning, by the way.
Yeah, it's a bit like... Good morning, Mike. It's a bit like the rail system, isn't it? Where we have a bit of warm weather and the rails buckle and train services get cancelled. But I think, Mike, what it does highlight is that 2 coal-fired power stations have been fired up in 2023. 2024, next year, those coal-fired power stations are being taken off the grid because Britain has been boasting about powering past coal. So those coal-fired power stations won't be available to bundle us out of tricky situations when wind and solar aren't working.
Yes, and that is the problem with renewable energy, isn't it? Because when it doesn't work, they have to go back to the coal, or they have to go back to some other form of what might be regarded as fossil fuel, because in the end, that's more reliable. Because here we are in supposedly 2023, having reached a level of civilization that doesn't involve living like a caveman.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. What we're doing is we're making our society like those in the past where we were exposed to the weather. I mean, in medieval Britain or whatever, you were exposed to the elements, and horrible it was too. Now we're making a civilized society dependent on the weather to generate energy. And at the same time, climate activists are saying, by the way, climate change is going to make the weather more extreme and less predictable. So what? We're going to make ourselves more dependent on the weather.
Right. And that's really ridiculous, because the weather, as you know, in this country, Rupert, is not particularly great. But we're told now that there's water shortages in Scotland because it hasn't rained very much. But we also know that every water company in the land seems to leak more water into the ground than actually prepare it for servicing taps. And, you know, the sort of inefficiency is quite mind-boggling. I can only assume that the inefficiency of solar-powered farms is also is equally bad.
Yeah, what you have, so in California, where they have a lot of solar, there's this, what you have on hot days, and there are quite a few of those in California. So electricity demand rises through the day as it gets hotter and hotter, and then suddenly in the evening the sun goes down. Solar generated electricity plummets, so they have to fire up a lot of gas generation and so forth. And we'll have that kind of problem here. So you cannot do without coal or without natural gas or indeed nuclear, but gas is the most responsive in a way. But net zero, we're planning to take these off, the natural gas power stations off by 2035 to have a completely decarbonised grid. And there's no technology that can make that happen.
No, there really isn't. And the trouble is now that the net zero maniacs have taken hold of almost every major political party. I think Reform's the only party that is touting, you know, what they want is net zero immigration, but not net zero for the actual carbon offset business. But we've got now a situation where I think the London ULEZ collection fees reached 224 million last year, £224 million. So that's going to make Sadiq Khan's budget completely and utterly dependent on charging people to drive in London. Now, that's not cleaning the air, is it? It's charging people to pollute it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The other thing, Mike, that's happened this week, or in fact happened last week, is the government has decided Ofgem is meant to be the energy regulator that's protecting consumer interests, and it is giving Ofgem a statutory duty to promote net zero. i.e. it is going to promote net zero above the interests of consumers. So that's just a charter for green rent seekers. And it's a very, very bad development for energy bills and for households across the country.
Yeah, because all that's going to happen is we're going to be trapped in this sort of never-ending spiral, which only goes in one direction, of other people's energy being charged to us, and then subsidies being given to companies who are making an absolute fortune, like Ecotricity, for example, Dale Vince's outfit, you know, where he's living very happily, then giving some of that money back to Just Stop Oil.
Yeah, and to the Labour Party, I think.
It's just absolutely mad. So, I mean, where does it all end, Rupert, is my question.
I don't know when it will end, but it will end, Mike, because at some point reality gets the better of this green hallucination that we're going through. And at some point, there is going to be a politician who says, net zero is a fantasy, and it's an extremely expensive fantasy, and it's one that the country can't afford. At some point that will happen. When it will happen, I can't, who knows? But at some point it will happen, because there is this reality, and that reality is unavoidable.
Yeah, it really is. Good to talk to you, Rupert. Thanks very much indeed. Rupert Darwall, author of Green Tyranny, on the news that basically Britain, it keeps having to fire up the coal plants, the coal power stations in this country. Guess why? Because the renewable energy sources are not very reliable. The latest to hit this particular situation is, of course, our new solar-powered farms, which have become less efficient whenever it gets a bit too hot. So let me get this straight. I know I may not be a scientist, but you have a solar panel which absorbs the heat from the sun and then transforms that heat into energy so that you can power something else with that electricity. But apparently, solar power is only good when it's not too hot. So instead of actually getting more power from the sun when it's hotter, they get less. Something wrong with that picture, isn't there?